Labour. Now, I have got a handout here which shows you who gained what seats in the election. And the important point to note, I think, is that the Conservatives gained 96 seats. Now, if you've gone back a couple of years and said, what is the likelihood of the Conservatives winning this election, the accepted wisdom was that the Conservatives had a mountain to climb. They would not, at least in one election, catch up with Labour. But in fact, there was a fairly substantial swing against Labour. The Conservatives improved their number of seats by 96, Labour lost 90, and the Liberal Democrat total went down very slightly. On election day, it became apparent, however, that at the end of the day, that no single party had an overall majority, and therefore there was what was highly unusual in British politics, no clear winner at the end of election night. Just want to say a couple of other things, both about the campaign and about the results themselves. In terms of the campaign, one thing happened and one thing didn't happen. The first thing that did happen was that the press, which had shifted away from the Conservatives, our press, if you go back to the 1990s, back to Mrs. Thatcher's period, 1980s, 90s, would have been overwhelmingly pro-Conservative. Under Major, John Major, in the early 1990s, the Conservatives lost support, and Tony Blair was very popular with the British press. But by the time we get to this election, the newspapers shift their support away from Labour, they desert Labour, and by May 2010, only the Daily Mirror was advocating a Labour victory. The thing that didn't happen was that people had predicted that there would be all sorts of electronic advances in the campaign, Twitter, Facebook, all these new aspects of the campaign that it was thought would be important. They weren't all that important at the end of the day. Just a couple more words about the result itself. The Tories won 36% of the vote, which was a higher share of the vote than Labour had in 2005, when Labour secured a massive majority. But that 36% share was not enough to give the Conservatives an overall majority. The Liberal Democratic share of the vote was up by 1%, went up to 29% from 28%, but the number of seats actually went down. Labour's vote, and this I think is quite crucial for when we come on to think about the future of the Labour Party, was the lowest it had been since 1983, which was seen as a very dark day indeed for the Labour Party. So Labour did very badly indeed, I think, in 2010. 35% of the vote was for parties other than the Labour and the Conservative Party. Again, another move towards Britain becoming much more of a multi-party system than in the past. You'll see here others, 29, these are mainly nationalists, Northern Irish parties. But by and large, the Conservative Labour share of the vote and its domination of the party system has been eroding since probably 1979. So what happened? Well, everybody was bemused, I think, by this result, and there were basically two options, or three, I suppose. One would have been a Labour-Liberal Democratic coalition. The other, what in fact happened, which was a Conservative Liberal Democratic coalition. And I suppose the third option would have been for one of the major parties to try to stay in power as a minority government, which could have worked, although they would have been vulnerable, they wouldn't have been able to get much legislation through, and the budget and difficult policies like cuts would have been very vulnerable to sabotage. the election, Gordon Brown stayed in number 10 Downing Street to a horror, I think, of some people. The Sun thought it should have gone immediately. The Sun was one of the papers that moved its support. And it commented on a man aged 59 who was seen squatting in a luxury home near Westminster. He refused to move. He was considering his options, and that in fact constitutionally is the right of a British Prime Minister to see if they can form a government even though they don't have a working majority. And he did that in 1974 and only left office in February when it was clear that the Liberal Democrats would not go into coalition with him. But Brown stayed there, and there then followed a rather elaborate dance with the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats opening conversations, and then, to some extent, Labour and the Liberal Democrats opening conversations. Clegg had said that he would first talk to the Conservatives. Now, this was quite interesting because, in a sense, the Liberal Democratic Party is a party that is split in many ways. It's often said that its heart is on the left and its head is on the right. Clegg, as leader of the Liberal Democrats, I think, is far to the right of his grassroots. And he had said early on that he would first negotiate with the party that had got the largest number of seats of the other two major parties. So, although many of his supporters, I think, would have preferred him to open negotiations with Labour, negotiations opened with the Conservatives, and teams were put in place and they rattled back and forth. And it looked as though it was breaking down with the Conservatives on Sunday, after the election on Thursday, when Brown announced that he would step down if his presence was a roadblock to a deal with Clegg. Clegg and Brown notoriously didn't get on, or they didn't like each other. Clegg didn't like Brown. But Clegg and Cameron, the Conservative leader, both at the same age, seemed to be very much more simpatico. At one rather confusing point, parallel negotiations were taking place, and it looked as though the Liberal Democrats were going to, in fact, throw in their lot with Labour. But at that point, something very interesting happened, and that's that a large number, some senior Labour politicians said, no, we don't want to go down this route. Coalition with the Liberal Democrats in circumstances where the electorate had obviously turned against the Labour Party was the people like David Blunkett and Reid and some of the senior cabinet ministers, a bit demeaning, in fact. Blunkett, who is the blind MP for Sheffield, a senior figure in the party, poured scorn on what the Liberal Democrats were doing, trying to get their policies best deal they could from the two parties. And he said that they were behaving like every harlot in history. So I think a lot of opposition inside the Labour Party closed the door on that option. It was also the case that if you look at the figures, even if you put the Labour and the Liberal Democratic numbers together, they would have had to rely to some extent to dominate the House of Commons on some of the other nationalist parties. And I think a lot of the, again, the Labour Party didn't want that to happen, whereas the Conservatives and Labour together have a clear working majority. So everybody sort of geared up to the end of Monday to, or during Sunday, Monday to, in fact, there being a Lib-Lab coalition. And in fact, that then collapsed, and Gordon Brown had no option but to resign. And what was interesting was that on the Tuesday, the press saw a lectern coming outside number 10